Alright, so a lot of people have been asking about this Ranger that's in my driveway. Well, I originally bought it as the replacement for the Rotstang when it clapped out, but that was about 6 or 8 months ago or so, and the Rotstang is just kept going, and still going today. So anyway, I figure I'll just get to the Ranger and start working on it, but with all the Facebook buy, sell, trade stuff popping up, I thought I'd try my hand at that, and I picked up this guy for $500, and I drove it home about 30 miles without an issue. It kind of idled high and the heat didn't work. I bought it kind of going into winter there. So, but it ran and drove, and for $500 you really can't beat that. I've done a little bit of body work that's pretty laughable where the hood didn't shut. So that's pretty entertaining there. That's about the extent of what I like to do for body work. But another issue it had was when it rained, it was getting water in on the driver's floor here. And you can see this has kind of become a storage unit. And anyway, the floor would get completely soaked. And at some point, something slid up and had hit the back of this cab. And it cracked this body line along with the other side, so when it rained it would run in the side here. But anyway, I just slapped some gasket sealer on there and that fixed all that right up. But anyway, today we're going to go through a little bit of diagnosis and get the thing straightened out, because I do plan to start driving it. So I guess at this point we'll pop the hood and start checking things over, and I always like my stuff to be reliable, and that's what we're going to do here. Make this $500 truck to the point of where I'm confident that I can drive it every day without issue. So we got the hood open here, and this is a pretty unique deal. It doesn't have any power steering on it and whatnot, but that's fine because most of my travel is straight line interstate for the most part. But when I first got the thing, there were a couple of issues. One being it wouldn't idle down. It seemed like it idled pretty high. It's got a tack in it, but it's not wired in. I'm sure they unplugged it to kind of hide that from me, even though, I mean, you can blatantly hear it. And the other thing is that it had a pretty good power draw, which, let's take a moment to appreciate this menagerie here going on, where they replaced the terminal, but they were too lazy to replace the whole wire. Needless to say, they weren't the most mechanically inclined folk, I noticed. But anyway, I don't know if it shows up on camera or if you can audibly hear it, but there's quite a significant power draw, and I don't have my multimeter on me, but we'll get to it later on how to track down where this power draw is. But the only electrical changes to this vehicle are an aftermarket radio, so I have a good feeling that they wired that to direct power instead of a keyed source, so it's always got power to the radio, unless you, I guess, would manually unplug it, if I had to guess. So with the idling down issue, it could be one of two things. Either the thermostat is stuck open, so that leaves the engine in what's called open loop, I believe. And I'm not super familiar with my injection terms. If you watch my channel, it's all carburetors. But it kind of hangs in open loop, and once an engine warms up, it'll go into closed loop. But it never really reaches that because it doesn't seem like it gets up to temp. And we'll check that later with a infrared gun. But anyway, until it gets up, once an engine will get up to temp, then it'll idle down because it can atomize that fuel. Or on top of the thermostat, it could have a blown head gasket. So what we're going to go ahead and do is, I got a pressure tester, and the first thing we're going to do before we get to firing this thing up and messing around is we'll pressurize our cooling system and then let that sit for a good 30 minutes to an hour and see if our pressure bleeds down. If it does, and if it bleeds down dramatically and we don't see any leaks from our hoses, there's a good chance we have a blown head gasket. So I'll pump that up and we'll have a look. Alright, so now we got our coolant system tester all plumbed up here. Pretty nice unit. They're pretty cheap. I think you can rent these, but I bought this one in particular for 40 bucks. So anyway, we're going to go ahead and just pump it up to the cap rating. We don't really need to go past that, so 13 psi is what we're going to go to, and then we'll let it sit and see what happens. Alright, it takes a little bit of pumping here, but we got it up to about 10, 11, 12 psi or so, which should be just plenty to tell if we have an issue. So basically what I'm going to do is just set that guy down. Careful not to push the little bleeder valve, which would bleed all the pressure down. But we'll just set it here and we'll come back in a half an hour and we shouldn't see this move. Now while we got our coolant system pumped up and we're waiting to see if it bleeds down, we can have a look at our under our timing cover here and see our timing belt, and it looks pretty much hashed. That's not something I'd want to drive around with, so I have already got myself another one. But if this were to snap in a interference engine, you know, you'd have your valve train hit the pistons and basically you destroy quite a bit of your engine. It gets pretty expensive, and with this being a $500 vehicle, we don't want to come into that situation. Now I could be wrong, but I believe the 2.3 liter is a non-interference engine, so if that does snap, we don't destroy the engine. But at the same time, I don't really want it to snap and strand me on the side of the road since I got to get to work and stuff on time. So we're going to go ahead and change that while we're here. And I also plan to change the water pump and put a new thermostat in this guy as well, just while we're here. But we'll fire it up and check these things over. But again, when you have all this apart, it's just easy to do it all at once. Another thing you can do while you're sitting here waiting is you can just go ahead and take a look at the oil if you haven't yet. So this oil, I'm trying to do this all with one hand here. This oil looks pretty clean on this guy. If you were to pull your dipstick and you have like kind of a milkshake look where it's all white and goopy, then you definitely have a blown head gasket where you're putting coolant into your oil, because when they mix, it just gives you that nasty slurry type deal. And that's one of the things you should probably check before you buy a vehicle, which I did. So I was fairly confident we didn't have an issue there. But just to be safe, again, we're pumping this guy up and we're going to test it out. So looking at a few more things here, this looks like our tack wire that was hooked to something at one point. I do believe it goes into this in some orientation. This looks like our little timing tab, but anyway, a lot of stuff will cook through here just to make sure this is reliable. Sit. Hey, drop it. Drop it. Drop it. Leave it. No. Leave it. Sit. Alright, so about 30 to 45 minutes has passed and we haven't bled down the cooling system whatsoever, so that's good news. I'm fairly confident in our head gasket. I really didn't want to get into that if I didn't have to. So it looks like we're just going to be able to cook through the basics now and be alright. Alright, so we got our battery cable kind of loosely fitted on there, and now we'll start it up and let it reach operating temperature, and then we can get our IR gun out and test our thermostat and see if that's working like it's supposed to, since these Ford gauges are horrifically inaccurate. So make sure she's in neutral over there. Turn the key on, let the pump prime, and doesn't start up bad. So anyway, we're gonna let it warm up and then take some coolant temp readings and see what we got. But overall, I don't hear any engine clatter, so that's always a win. Well, while this is warming up here, I was kind of pressing the brake pedal, which is kind of changing the engine RPM. I might look into that also. Could be a vacuum leak. But I noticed this guy went straight to the floor, and I remember it being kind of spongy when I drove it home, and there's clearly a severed brake line, because after I touched it a few times, we have a nice wet spot of brake fluid. So hopefully that's easy to get to, but obviously we have a rusted brake line as well. Alright, she's had ample time to run now where we can test things out. As you can tell, it's idling pretty dang high, and that muffler ends under the vehicle, which I recently found out with the old rod stang is illegal, but I made the cop laugh so much about how rusty the old rod stang was, he let me off with a warning. But anyway, we'll have to fix that, because the lady's not so thrilled with all the loud stuff I have. Seems like we're charging a good voltage, so the alternator seems to be in good shape. There's definitely a bearing noise, but considering we only have the water pump and the alternator. It's one or the other, so that should be pretty easy to determine. Now looking at our temp here, like I said, it's been running for quite a while, and we're only getting up to like 140 degrees, and it kind of fluctuates there, back and forth, and I'm gunning my upper radiator hose. So normally I see that at 180, 190 degrees, and that's why we have such a high idle, which again, I'm sure you can tell from the exhaust note here, is it's just hanging in open loop, or whatever you want to call it, and it's never quite idling down. So definitely I would say that our thermostat is failed and it's stuck open. So we're just running and we can never reach operating temperature, which in the end really hurts fuel economy, and that's pretty easy to change. But overall, I think that's what we can determine from it running, and I guess we'll move on to determining our bearing noise. Side note, I don't even have to get my multimeter out because I can see firsthand here that the key is indeed out of the vehicle and the radio is still on. So they wired that directly to a 12-volt source, and even when you turn it off, let's try that again. Even when you turn it off, that power button is still illuminated, so it's still drawing power, and we'll rewire that because that's really not the scenario that we want. So I'm pretty sure that tracks down our power draw, because I don't see any other extraneous items inside the vehicle outside of the tach, which I guess we'll check that as well. But as for the power draw, I guess that was pretty easy to figure out. So now I'm just loosening up my alternator, because the alternator actually doubles as a tensioner on account of this being a pretty simple design here. So I gotta loosen my other bolt here, and then I can swing this down, then we can get our belt off and kind of see which of our two pulleys here is the affected unit. Once you have those mounting bolts loose, you can give it just a quick push there, and then we can get our belt on and off and slide it right up over the fan and get it on out of there. So with our belt off here, which still appears to be in good shape, looking down our water pump, it doesn't have any in play to speak of, so the water pump's probably in good shape yet. I'm noticing some cracking on this Jenko plastic fan, but that should still hold together, and if it flies apart, it is plastic, and I do have other radiators, but you know, that is something to look out for and definitely could be replaced. But this is the noise that we're hearing, obviously, and if you look really close, you can see the problem right here. So if you can see that guy like I can, which I'm not sure if it shows up as well, but that shaft is almost out around where that thing's kind of walking around when you spin it. So that's definitely the issue there. But overall, those are just some of the real brief things. Obviously, you want to check your wheel bearings and your drive shaft U-joints before you'd ever drive when you buy a new vehicle, so I'm not even going to check those. I'm just going to re-grease the bearings and check that over and potentially put new U-joints in. But outside of that, that's kind of some of the things I go through when I check a vehicle and buy a vehicle for really cheap. So check back and we'll work through this thing together, fixing it up.